So today we are lucky to have an amazing two guests from Ambrose Partners. Ambrose Partners provides integrated government and public affairs solutions. Ambrose strategically navigates clients through the changing currents of Washington. And with Ambrose, we have co-founders and partners, Kevin Fogarty and Eugene Patrone. Kevin has been a senior advisor on Capitol Hill for over 20 years. Crane's New York business has noted Mr. Fogarty has become crucial for anyone pushing measures that need bipartisan support. So good words out of Crane's for you, Kevin. And Eugene. Eugene has been senior policy advisor to 5 members of Congress. You have a tremendous resume and background as well. Both you guys I know are calling in from, I believe, the DC area. So I appreciate you guys jumping on today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Devin. Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it, Devin.
So I think one of the big topics of discussion in the U.S. right now is this infrastructure bill. So I wanted to start on the bill and talk a little bit about it, because it's going to have a big impact on everybody nationwide. And then an even more so impact on people in the real estate and construction industries, which a lot of our listeners are. So what have you seen in the bill so far? What should we be looking out for? Are there any red flags in it?
So there's a few things about this that I think are really important, and this is President Biden's second foray into a big legislative policy initiative, right? The first was the $1.9 trillion he spent on COVID, and this would be the second one where he's spending in excess of $2 trillion. And it's unique because it's the longest infrastructure bill in terms of being 10 years as opposed to 5 or 6. It's also unique insofar as that the bill doesn't just spend on infrastructure and transportation. That's about 30-something% of it. It spends, I would say, 35% on buildings and development for a whole host of other things. And it's going to meet with some resistance in both the Senate and the House because of the cost and what the pay-fors are. And right now, one of the pay-fors are increasing the corporate tax rate over 15 years, which would cover the cost of the bill. So I think as an industry, the construction industry itself should look upon this favorably in many ways, because it'll give them and their employees and workers an opportunity to really get back to work and fix a lot of the decaying bridges and roadways and so on. So I think that's the good news in this bill for an industry overall.
And I've seen, I think Jeff Bezos came out and said he wouldn't be opposed to the corporate tax increase, even though, a lot of people know him as somebody who doesn't want to pay taxes. But I guess people are going to be on both sides of the fence with that on the corporate level. But to the everyday, person who's working that 9 to 5 and collecting their paycheck, is there anything to be concerned on their taxes being increased?
I think right now they're focusing, obviously, because they're looking to pay for this thing in 15 years, the corporate tax is the biggest revenue producer for them, right? So that's really, the problem is going to be you're having pushback on the Republican side to that proposal. And even a key senator on the Democratic side, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, has already indicated he's opposed to that. He thinks it should be somewhere around the ballpark of 26% rather than going up to 28. So from that standpoint, you're going to have negotiations going on. President Biden on Wednesday even indicated that it's inevitable to have sort of reforms to this proposal, right? So this is going to be hashed out. The time frame on that, though, is we heard from Senator Coons from Delaware, close ally of President Biden, that they're sort of looking at a month for Republicans to be able to offer their suggestions or how they want to change things, but they're not going to wait forever. They don't want sort of any inaction, that they'll move forward with it. And Speaker Pelosi on the House side has indicated she'd like to have it all wrapped up by August. So you're going to have stuff moving along. I think we'll see in the coming weeks, especially on the tax side, where there may be some changes going on. It would seem the corporate component is the greatest part. Now, if that does go down, they're going to have to look to raise revenue from other areas. So hopefully it doesn't trickle down to a lot of your listeners on any level,
Yeah. Sorry, Kevin. Yeah, one of the other distinctions between this bill and the COVID relief bill is that there was no pay for in that bill. This bill, the administration is looking to pay for the bill itself. So that is a big distinction between the two pieces of legislation. But going back specifically to your initial question, Devin, if you look at buildings, under the section that deals with construction and buildings, traditional construction, that accounts for about, $700 billion worth of spending. That's a significant amount. And so for people in the industry, where do the benefits lie potentially? Well, to improve and build affordable housing, there's over $200 million for that. $200 billion for that. That's pretty significant in the metropolitan area like New York, right? There's going to be high-speed broadband deployment. So that'll also enhance the value of some of the homes in some of the areas as well. They'll be improving, and this could also benefit people too. There'll be some probably renovation and improvement to federal buildings to make them more environmentally friendly. So that's a significant portion of what's going to be in this bill. And I think for the people listening, there'll be a significant amount of opportunity for them to benefit from just that building and construction portion of the bill, which is more than a third of it.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Yeah, just to follow what Eugene was saying, I mean, housing isn't a major part in this bill. However, the administration is proposing, we haven't seen all the details yet on the plan, but they're also proposing about $5 billion in inducements, which would be tax incentives, federal spending, grants to local communities to allow for the construction of apartments, multifamily housing in areas where right now, the local communities will only have it as a single family structure. So there's a lot of opportunities here, I think, as you're coming in the coming weeks and months, especially for the construction industry and the contracting business, to have a lot of possibilities out there. And it could be an exciting time.
And I think those are strong points. Being from Long Island, there is a need for affordable housing. No doubt we're losing people every day to other states. It's just not affordable for a lot of people to live here. And so having that component, along with having the component of incentivizing local municipalities to ease up on their zoning codes. I mean, I feel like the bill is talking right to Long Islanders because we've got some pretty hard zoning regulations. We see a lot of towns that are easing up on their own, and we see a lot that's happening, but I'm definitely interested to see, what those incentivizations are, or how that's going to trickle down, how the local municipalities are going to respond to that and to receive that. I guess my question is, this thing gets passed, right? And everybody on both sides of the table, come to some sort of agreement. How does that money trickle down through government to, is it going to local municipalities? Like, how does that money flow?
Yeah, it's interesting because, so let's use, and I think a lot of your listeners will appreciate this. Let's use the Long Island Expressway as an example, right? A 71-mile corridor going from, pretty much Manhattan all the way out east. Now, that's part of the federal highway system, but there's actually a few entities that deal with it, right? There's the New York State Department of Transportation. There's the MTA in New York that has jurisdiction over that as well, because they obviously collect tolls coming out of the Midtown Tunnel. So there's a few entities that have their hands on that road. Normally, what happens is states get allocated the money. The state DOTs get allocated a portion of the money in individual buckets. So a state like New York would get a certain amount of money for highways and a certain amount of money for transit. That's the way it's worked in the past, at least. This is going to be a little bit different because it includes so much there's so many other things that have not typically been included in past transportation bills. But it starts at the state DOT level and then works its way down through the municipalities and the localities.
And that's in there from the start. You're saying there's no, fighting for your share of the pie. That's agreed upon when the bill passes.
Well, it's interesting because it always has been New York fighting for its share of the pie. And this goes back, 30 years, Kevin, and probably even before that, right? When Senators Moynihan and D'Amato were in the Senate, New York was always fighting for its share because a lot of Southern and Western states would argue that New York is taking too much money. And they fought pretty hard, both of them, to ensure that New York was getting its fair share, particularly on the transit side. Because New York has the largest mass transit system in the country. Between when you look at the MTA and you look at which also runs Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, there's a lot of mass transit. Putting aside anything else coming in from the Port Authority, so there's a lot coming into New York. So there will be a fight, certainly at the federal level and in Congress. And New York, is fortunate. We have several members on both sides of the aisle that are on the Transportation Committee, and and obviously two senators, Senator Gillibrand and Senator Schumer, as the majority leader, will certainly have a lot of say as to what comes in that final bill before it's sent off to President Biden's desk.
All in all, it seems like it's not really a bad thing. Are there flaws to this at all?
Well, the question is always going to be, how are you going to pay for it, right? And that's on top of some of the other coronavirus packages that have come out. I think there's a concern about the deficit, et cetera, and is this sustainable? Can we keep doing this? So I think in the coming weeks, it's really going to be fleshed out a little bit. I think some Republicans were hoping for a smaller, sort of more focused, smaller bill on infrastructure itself rather than some of these other items. However, this is also a long-term investment for our country. So I think you have to really look at the long game rather than the short game here. And I think in the coming weeks, though, we'll see where the opposition is coming from and how if there has to be adjustments made from the tax side, if it's still going to be passed along to the corporations rather than the individual small guy.
And we've seen it in history. History obviously repeats itself. Infrastructure and investing in your infrastructure is absolutely a great way to come out of a recession and get people working. And it is a long-term solution. So, everything that I've heard so far, I think it all sounds great. As you said, hopefully we can pay for this. Hopefully whatever is done on the tax side doesn't hurt the everyday person, and we don't increase the deficit further, because for me, I've always questioned, can we really just continue to create cash and pump money into the economy without seeing hyperinflation? I feel like there's got to be another side to this, and I'm not an economist, but it's definitely a concern.
Yeah, hopefully
there's a couple of things, Devin, that you said that kind of resonate, at least with me, and that's one of the things is who is going to pay for this. So there's 2 points. One is normally, or the way it was conceived way back in 1953 when the interstate highway system was conceived by President Eisenhower, is that the federal gas tax would cover the cost of the roads, which worked okay until all of a sudden lots of people were traveling and lots of trucks were on these roads, and they were really getting beaten up pretty badly. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it hasn't been politically popular to raise the federal gas tax. And for 27 years, it's remained the same. It hasn't changed. No one's indexed it. People talk about it, but it's one of the things people don't want to do because, as you can imagine, it's not politically popular. And especially when it comes close to summertime vacations, that's the last thing, Congress wants to do. The other thing that's on the table now is something Secretary Buttigieg has suggested, is VMT, vehicle miles traveled. So people, it's a user fee, right? The more you drive, the more you're going to pay, which I think is not going to be, I mean, I don't think that's going to be politically popular either. And I think there'll be a lot of pushback, not just from individual taxpayers like you and I, or people going away on vacation, but I think a lot of vacation destinations, which are hurting right now, are going to be opposed to that. You know, and making the point that, look, we've been hurting for a year. We're trying to get people to come back to spend time at our hotels and our beaches and take their families on vacations. And now you're penalizing them from driving 250 miles or 300 miles. So I don't know that has much legs either.
For somebody that's on the road 25 to 30 miles a year, I hope that doesn't grow legs, because I'll be hit. You know, just thinking through this, we've seen now the New York State legalize recreational marijuana. You see a lot of other states that have already legalized it or following suit. I think I've heard people on the federal level say that they want to eventually legalize it. Could the legalization of recreational marijuana be a solution to, you know, taxing it and then helping us, you know, get back on track?
Yeah, it's always a possibility, but I think in terms of the timing for this thing, you know, there's only about, I think 17 states have it legalized, or 18 states. There's nothing on the federal level right now. I don't see anything coming out of DC yet that it's a move that people want to make right away. You know, going forward, maybe if there is some momentum on it, it certainly is something that you could be looking into as a revenue stream. But right now, especially since both the Senate and the House want to get this transportation thing done by August, to the president's desk by then, you know, I'm not sure marijuana would be, you know, one of the vehicles yet, but it certainly could be something in the future to raise some revenue.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin on that too. I think it would be a big lift for a lot of states, or a lot of people to go along with that, because they'd get a lot of flack back home about it being a gateway drug, and about some, you know, and how it would affect particularly teenagers. And there was a lot of talk very early on about the likelihood of this passing, because Senator Harris, then Senator Harris, now Vice President Harris, had a bill in the Senate to legalize marijuana. But I think the administration is battling, or advocating enough things, not battling, I should say, but advocating enough right now that that's not going to be, as Kevin said, top of their priority list. The odd thing about it, Devin, and you probably already know this, is that the challenge with selling cannabis, even in states where it's legal, is using the federal banking system, because it's an illegal substance. So it really is a challenge. And I think it probably has some people within the Treasury Department, particularly the IRS, sort of scratching their heads saying, geez, we know we have all these people buying and selling this stuff. We have all these transactions happening out there, but they're not using the federal banking system. Like, how is this happening, and why are we part of it? So it's not going away, as Kevin said. I just don't know. I agree with him when he says it's not a 2021.
And I think, Dev, one of the things that's really important for your listeners, a lot of what's going on in Washington is the way the Senate is broken down 50-50. The House, you know, for the Democrats, they have pretty much 2 votes that right now, because they're still waiting on another special election to fill a seat. There really is very little room for error. So right now, especially when you have senators who can go either way on these bills, the focus seems to be really making sure they're going to take one issue at a time. What do we need to get this over the finish line? And I think right now, if you brought in marijuana right now, I just don't think there's the bandwidth for a lot of these senators to get stuff through. And I think the focus will be, let's get the transportation bill done. And then we can also think about in the future other ways to bring in some revenue.
So one of the other big topics right now is immigration, and we've got thousands and thousands of people crossing our borders every day, children being held. It's just not a pretty sight right now.
Nope.
How do we tackle this? How do we stop the bleeding? And even more so, how do we give somebody wanting to come here legally like the vehicle to do that, where they're not waiting 5-10 years to get here? The person that wants to do it the right way, I'm a big believer that there should be something to help them through that process more quicker.
Right. You want to reward people for doing the right things and doing it the right way, right?
Of course.
And I think right now, unfortunately, you have this horrific situation at the border, and it's tough seeing all those videos of those children. But right now, like I was saying, the way the Senate and the House are broken up, it's really hard to find a room for compromise or find something that will work together. And right now, it seems to be both parties are fighting with each other or trying to utilize the situation to gain chits, or should say gain points somewhere else. And it's frustrating. And I'm not sure immigration is going to be something that, again, they're going to tackle or deal with. And it's maybe have to be up to, say, the Biden administration with executive orders or doing something from the executive component to address it. And I'm not sure if Congress can do anything right now or be politically willing or able to do it, unfortunately.
The last major overhaul of immigration law was 35 years ago. And that's not to suggest people haven't been trying. They've tried almost year after year, right? Lots of people have tried. I believe during the Bush administration, and certainly during the Obama administration, they got close a couple of times. But it's one of the most difficult issues to deal with. Because at its very essence, it's dealing with human beings and the kids you're seeing in these camps and in these centers, which is heart-wrenching. And then once you hear the stories of what's happening in some of these centers, it's even worse. So I don't really know that the Senate or the House is going to be able to take this up this year. One of the things, and Kevin and I would always talk about this as staffers. From outside Washington, D.C., sometimes people think there's a lot of time. When you look at the summer recesses and the other things that happen during the holidays, they're not in very often to negotiate and work on a lot of these bills. And I think that's why Senator Coons and Speaker Pelosi have said, we are giving a finite window on what we're going to do and how we're going to do it on this transportation bill, because they realize that if they don't, it'll just linger. It'll go on, and there'll be more back and forth, and nothing will ever happen. People will wring their hands for a long time. Even when Senator Obama signed the transportation bill several years ago, from the date it was introduced to the date he signed it was 4 years. So I think they're experienced enough, both of them, to know, look, we need to get this thing done sooner. Just sooner.
I agree. And that's a good thing that they put that time limit on it. It's not for the average person to see this and to have to wait because people are on vacation. It's not the right, not the right representation that, I would vote for. But moving on to another topic, cybersecurity. I feel like it's not talked about as much these days in the news and in the media. You hear a lot about, social media and are they affecting elections and whatnot. But on the cybersecurity side, I mean, that is definitely something that needs to be top of mind at all times. Everything we do now is technology, from working now in the post or during the pandemic. Everything, a lot of it is on Zoom. Cybersecurity is super important. We don't want to be exposed to terrorism through cybersecurity. What's happening right now in DC to make sure that this continues to be a focus and people are safe at the end of the day?
Well, see, I think you're seeing a lot of changes in the last few months because there was a thing called the Solarium Commission, which had all these recommendations. It was released last March, right in the middle of the pandemic, so it didn't get as much attention, about all these changes that not only the federal agencies had to make, but also private sector companies, corporate cultures, et cetera. But thankfully, it was included in some defense authorization bills, and a lot of those recommendations that were incorporated into law are now starting to pan out. So you're seeing things, a lot more money going towards CISA, which is the DHS component, and it's sort of like the quarterback for the federal government for cyber. And you're seeing a lot more money being put into, in fact, two New York representatives who I think are key for us are the chairperson and the ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee. They're even looking at legislation which would provide localities and states much more money for them to put into cyber. We've seen that with the water treatment facilities attacks in Florida, one in Kansas. A lot of these state and localities just don't have the money to upgrade their infrastructure to make sure that they're not susceptible to ransom attacks. And that's going on true for a lot of companies. I think there's a problem, and you're seeing this a little bit of a change, because in fact, the National Association of Manufacturers, I believe they had a study out, which is talking about 61% of these companies have been subjected to a ransomware attack. And there is a problem where they're leery of revealing that information, that they were subject to an attack. And I think there's sort of been this idea that it's going to hurt their business in the long run if they show that they were attacked. But really, you learn so much from these attacks on how to prevent them from future attacks that having this type of dialogue is really good. And I think a lot of the money that we're starting to see go into cyber will hopefully trickle down for a lot of the listeners of the program, and especially a lot of the local and state communities that'll help out for some of those projects. So I'm staying optimistic that it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, and one of the challenges has been getting private companies to share what they know about potential cyber attacks or threats with the federal government, right? There's always a bit of nervousness with a private company sharing in data or information with the federal government. They don't want to do that, and there's some obvious reasons, as Kevin alluded to earlier. If that gets out, that hey, we could be under attack or we were just attacked, before they have a way to massage that. It has, it has its own market implications. Their stock price will go down. Consumers will lose confidence. They'll stop shopping there. So there is a real, they have a legitimate concern about doing that. At the same time, though, they might get advance warning before the federal government even will on some of their on potential threats. And I think it's about time. It seems about time that they start really working together, some of these larger companies and the federal government, to prevent these attacks from happening, because they have some sophisticated people working at these larger companies, whether you're a multinational investment bank or consumer goods manufacturer. You will have lots of sophisticated people working there. So I think we're hoping that they come up with a bill this year that addresses all the concerns. And I know that certainly within the Pentagon, this is top of mind for them. I mean, this is one of their top threats, along with foreign terrorists.
Good to hear that it's top of mind. I guess wrapping up, my last question is for the person out there who thinks, the federal government is the federal government. There's nothing I can do to change it. It's not affecting, local government here. I don't need to vote. I don't need to worry about it. It is what it is. What do you have to say to that person?
Get involved. I mean, for me, politics is one of those things where you start even on the local level, you get to the state and to the federal, there's momentum. And, if you take an example on the federal level, you have a congressional representative. If they're hearing from their local elected officials about problems that are going on in the community, and there's a solution on the federal level, that chain and that process can really have an impact, and you can get your elected officials involved in something that can benefit. There's a lot of potential for a lot of your listeners. I mean, I worked for Pete King for 25 years, and Andrew Garbarino, who's now replacing him, he's in this position now. He's on the Homeland Security Committee, just like Congressman King, but he's also on the Small Business Committee. And he's going to have access, and he's going to be able to influence things for a lot of people on Long Island in a good way. But sometimes if he's not aware of a problem, because nobody's told him about that, there's nothing he can do about it. But I think you really have to have that idea that to voice any concerns you have, being able to voice any problems you have to your elected officials, because it works its way up. And it's a really effective process when people are engaged. I think if they understand that and they stay optimistic that they want to be, and if they just remain pessimistic, yeah, things aren't going to change. You got to get involved, unfortunately.
Yeah, and following up on Kevin's point, it's easier now to get involved than it ever has been. Years ago, we didn't have the ability to do what we're doing today, Devin, and speak to people and get your voice heard, right? People can create their own website, create their own social advocacy network through any platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and really, build some momentum for whatever cause they think is important. And I think that, maybe you don't have faith in the federal government, maybe you've lost faith in your local government, but there is an opportunity if you think about it and you're a little bit creative and you get some like-minded folks, you can really use all of these platforms to your advantage. Where you can have, a 12, 13-year-old girl speaking about gun control on the mall and then going and speaking on every popular talk show that there is. I mean, the mall here in DC by the Washington Monument. So yeah, I understand why people would say that. But, like Kevin, as a veteran of Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill, I think there's more opportunity now than ever. You're not just simply writing a letter that gets tossed in the circular file. If you want to be thoughtful about it, you can put something together and really get a lot of eyeballs and eardrums for your cause.
And I understand too, a lot of times when people are turning on the media, it's local or national, it's all negative, right? And all they highlight is dysfunction, but there's a lot of good things going on in government, all different levels, despite, and again, it's the bad stuff that they like to have eyeballs on, but there's a lot of good stuff and there's a lot of good people involved in government. And I think if there's a will, there's a way. And, that's what we like about Ambrose is that we have all this knowledge of how DC works. And we're looking to help out the little guys, if there are things that they don't understand or they need help on. That's what we're trying to show, that there's a lot of good stuff going on. There's a lot of good things that can happen from the government for your own business. And that, when you merge those two, it's a great thing.
And so if anybody wants to reach out to you guys and further the conversation, have a discussion, what's the website? Where can they find you?
Oh, it's ambrosepartners.com, AMBROSE. We utilize that since we're both from New York for Ambrose Channel, going and supporting New York. So, if they want to reach out to us at ambrosepartners.com, they can contact us there and be happy to help. Or on LinkedIn, we're both on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Always appreciate the conversation.
Hey,
Thank
Devin,
you guys
thanks for
for
having us.
coming on.